I voted for Donald Trump, and a while ago I made a few videos explaining my feelings on why at the time. And I don't regret that decision either. But I've always identified as a moderate liberal by preference, maybe just plain a moderate, or maybe an independent. And traditionally, what we have seen is in the United States, you have the left and you have the right, and one of those two is going to inevitably win. The independent is not. So that creates a dilemma where even if you might not agree with either party, you're going to have to vote for one of the two that you determine to be, shall we say, the lesser of two evils. And that does make sense. Now, I've always been inclined to say to the people who choose not to vote, to the people who say, well, I'm not going to vote for either party because I don't agree with either party. I'm going to just not vote at all. I've been inclined to say, well, that's probably not the right take, because if there is a lesser of two evils, if there's two parties and neither of them are perfect, but one is clearly a better choice than the other in the moment, then why would you not vote for the one that's a better choice? That does indeed make sense. But I also have some objection to the fact that we have to choose between the lesser of two evils. And we get to a point where it ceases to be particularly clear which one is the lesser of two evils. Now, I was overwhelmingly appalled by the attitude of tyranny that we saw during COVID and things with the liberals and big tech companies silencing anyone who didn't want to subscribe to a specific narrative surrounding things like COVID related issues. And then, of course, as we went into DEI related stuff, I've also been rather disgusted by the fact that we've tried to take something which would intrinsically be a good thing in moderation, inclusion, and tolerance of others, and we turned it into some sort of a pseudo-religion where we were forcing trans stuff and all of the weird things that no one really wanted to see into the mainstream and trying to act like you're a bigot if you aren't into it. And we saw a really good example of that in the gaming space, as so many games wound up having some sort of a theme injected into them, which felt unnatural and was clearly just there to check the box of being inclusive or pushing that narrative. So I stand by all of that. And yet, on the other side of the fence, we have people on the right who want to go ditch to ditch. And I think there's a problem. Some people will say with those who don't want to respect the Constitution, but I think that that's a rather confusing way to put it, because I'm not a constitutional scholar. More specifically, the problem is with those who believe that they should not be subject to the rule of law. That the government should be able to go in with a billy club and force other people to do what it believes to be right. And the liberals have been very guilty of doing this, saying, well, we're going to mandate what we believe to be in the best interest of the people. We will be moral arbiters of truth, We will tell people what to believe. We will tell them what to eat. We will tell them what they need to do in life to be good citizens, and then we'll follow up to make sure they fall in line. And that's a corrupt way of governing. But on the other side of the fence, now we see things like, coming to mind, the Trump administration telling the Associated Press that they are not going to allow journalists to participate in White House press events if they don't agree to refer to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. It's petty, it's trivial, it's stupid, but it's a variation of the exact same thing which I opposed when it came from the left. The desire to force other people to align with a narrative and to shut them down by any means necessary if they don't agree. We see crazy, stupid things happening on both sides of the political fence. Whether it's a cross-dresser in the Pentagon, or Trump trying to rename a body of water, or, for that matter, Trump issuing his own favorite meme coin in the crypto space so that he can do a quick pump and dump. These are the kinds of things which undermine the credibility of those people in office and potentially undermine the legitimacy of our system of government as a whole. And we see problems on the right, we see problems on the left. Now, here's where it becomes sort of a paradigm shift. When there isn't any lesser of two evils anymore. When you look at both sides and you see the same thing happening on both sides, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, it's the same ridiculously human flaws at play. When you look at these people and you realize that both of them will potentially lead to an end which is bad, just in different ways. It's sort of like going back in time to the era of communists and Nazis, the Soviet Union and the Third Reich. Which of the two would you say was better? Well, if one was going to rule the world or the other, what would you prefer? A communist world state or a fascist one? I'm not entirely certain that I can tell you which would be better, but I can tell you that neither would be ideal. And the hope would be that when we vote for, say, a Republican in this last election, that would be a cautionary tale to the Democrats, that they would do some soul searching, they would see where they went wrong, they would pivot from the far left more toward the moderate left, and then they would come back in a better place to deliver a moderate outcome, a moderate candidate next time election season rolls around. Then maybe it would be possible to vote for them in good conscience because they would have realized, because they lost an election, they needed to pay more attention, be more mindful of the pulse of the nation, and they should work to better serve the interests of their constituents on both sides of the aisle. But is that really what's going to happen? I'm inclined to say it probably isn't. Because probably what will happen is the people in power right now, in this case, those on the right, will continue to do things which are increasingly extreme. They will continue to move not toward the center, but further toward the right, toward the attitude of trying to consolidate power to affect their interests. And that will continue to agitate and infuriate the already polarized and extremist leaning left, which then leads to a situation where every time the pendulum swings back the other way, which it will, it swings further. Every time someone on the right gets into power, they're more extreme than they were the last time. Every time someone on the left gets into power, they're extreme, more so than in the past. And so we move increasingly from two moderate parties to two extreme ones. And eventually that probably either leads to the collapse of the country, or it leads to the prevailing of a single party state, where one somehow prevails over the other at the expense of the other. And we no longer have a liberal democracy with open discourse in the style of Plato's Republic. So, what can we really do? We vote, or maybe we don't. When you don't really believe that either side is intrinsically better than the other, if you aren't entirely certain and you can't really be confident that there is any lesser of two evils, then at what point do you just withdraw yourself completely? Mind your own business and don't even have a voice in the matter. It's sort of like looking at wild animals in the jungle fighting. Does it really matter which one wins? Does it matter? Or are they just doing their thing? Just let it play out however it plays, because there really isn't any correct side to take. We should always be trying to move toward creating a society which is rooted in a moderate approach to governance, to acknowledge that there's validity in points made by both sides of the aisle, and also understand that in their extreme forms, neither party will serve the interests of the people. We do have baked into our country a certain degree of inefficiency, a tendency to create stalemates and to prevent people from being able to get things done. And that's, if there is a silver lining, probably the cause for hope that we do live in a country which is inclined to make it very difficult for any one entity to have power absolutely forever. But that's why, at the same time, we should always be very cautious when we see the consolidation of power, and people who have a desire to ignore what appears to be due process in favor of strongmanning their idea of what is right. When we see something like the Trump administration say that they're going to abolish an agency of the government or make something happen, and they don't really seem to care very much whether a judge rules against them, whether there's some sort of a legal roadblock, because in their mind, they don't need to worry about legal roadblocks because they are higher than the law. Or in the time of COVID, when the liberals were silencing people on social media, and they said it's for the greater good. Well, who determines the greater good? That's a power too great for any one man or one organization to have solely. So, the separation of powers, the ensuring that no one absolutely gets their way, the willingness to pivot back and forth and not be identified completely by one particular ethos or ideology. You know, I was thinking about getting another phone, cell phone, and I've always had Android phones. And then I was thinking, maybe I should get an iPhone. Well, I don't know. The temptation would be to say I'm going to go get another Android phone because that's what I'm used to and that's what I've always had. Because I know how to use it well, it may work better for me. But to use that as an allegory, what if the iPhone was better? But the reason why I don't want to use it is just because I never have. You see, we tend to always keep doing the things we've always done. We have similar habits, similar routines, similar groups of friends. We go back to the same echo chambers, the same silos, and as time goes on, we get more and more rigid, more unwilling to consider that maybe our opinions are wrong. And then we become so defined by those things that they're part of the DNA of our core identity. We don't really have any sense of self outside of those ideologies with which we have aligned ourselves. In my neighborhood, there is a house, and flying outside on the front porch of that house, there's a couple of Trump flags. One says, "Jesus is my king," and "Trump is my president," which is a little bit fascinating when you consider how often the Trump crowd likes to compare, or rather contrast their religious faith along with their political identity. It would seem to be that Trump is often viewed by people on the right as a sort of a messianic figure, sort of like the equivalent of Jesus on earth. But it is interesting how someone would, just feel like maybe saying that they're a follower of Jesus and saying that they're a supporter of Trump would naturally need to go on the same flag flying on their front porch. That kind of says something there. And then they've got another flag of screen print of the picture of Trump when he had his assassination attempt, which was admittedly a very iconic picture in media history. Absolutely. As someone who likes taking photographs, I can't begin to imagine how impressed that particular photographer was to get the iconic Trump getting shot in the ear surrounded by Secret Service agents. That was an amazing photograph from a journalism perspective. That being said, though, would I want that picture on a flag flying on my front porch along with the Jesus is King, Trump is the president flag? I don't know. That seems a bit extreme, doesn't it? Right next door, for years, this guy's neighbor has always flown a pride flag, probably not particularly for any reason other than to have a certain degree of competition and to antagonize the other person. So you have the guy flying the obnoxious Trump flags with his house decked out in red, white, and blue, Christmas lights all year round, and then you have the Pride house right next door. I thought that's kind of ironic and ridiculous, but it's also a sign of the times. People have gotten so childish in the sense that they're doing silly antics that you would expect teenagers to do, but it's grown adult people in the second to later half of their life that are doing all of this stuff. The question is, where is the staid civility, the maturity, the wisdom in our political spaces? Or have we just become so distracted with the era of Instagram and Twitter and X and Reddit that now we don't really know how to act like mature, wise people? And then there's the ones who do have the capacity for wisdom, but we always pick the lesser of two evils. We always align with one party or another, because why would you throw your vote away, right? Why would you pick a third middle way when no one else is going to support you there? You know, it's kind of like RFK Jr. He was an independent candidate, but he didn't really have a chance to win. So what did he do? He aligned himself with what he determined to be the lesser of two evils, and now he's part of the Trump administration portfolio. But does that necessarily reflect his values as an individual? Well, I don't know. Probably not, though, because in a perfect world, he would have preferred to be an independent. I think Tulsi Gabbard probably would have preferred to be an independent if she had the opportunity to be. Perhaps she would have even preferred to be a Democrat. But we live in a time when people expect you to go to one side or the other. And if you're standing in the middle, folks will say, "What's wrong with you? Go pick a side." And you have to pick a side, which is problematic when there is no side which really represents your values or what you truly believe to be best for the country and for society. I do think sometimes it would be interesting to see a time when maybe we will see some sort of a independent candidate win, some sort of a third place party that's not mainstream become mainstream. Certainly it has happened from time to time in history. I don't think it'll really happen, though, because in general, people tend to be rather inclined in their nature to be polarized. It's sort of an unavoidable part of the human experience to want to pick a side. And people don't really like shades of gray. Shades of gray aren't exciting. It's a lot easier to say, are you black or are you white? So even if the truth winds up being somewhere down the middle, the average pulse of the masses will inevitably be either on the right or on the left. Those who choose to be in the middle, well, they will always be also in the minority. And maybe that's okay. It can be a lonely place, though, to realize that the cost of choosing the middle way means that you have to take that way alone. And everyone else would rather just pick what color Kool-Aid they want to drink, because I guess that's more convenient, isn't it? It's always more convenient when you can just pick a tribe and say, well, here's the one that I align with. And it's me against everybody else. You have your people. You have your clan to rally with. That's a lot more convenient, I would say, than taking a path less traveled. You know, when we talk about the left and the right, it's interesting how women tend to always lean toward the left and men always tend to lean toward the right. And if you were to really distill it down to a very simple explanation, the left is more about control and the right is more about power. And both of those are important, and both of those are very toxic in their extremes. But to say that one or the other should prevail against the other is sort of like saying we should maybe want to have a world where there are no men and only women, or saying we want a world where there's no women and only men. Say which one is better? You know, it depends how you look at it, because both are better at something. And if you choose to say that you want to create a world where there's one or the other, it doesn't really matter which one you pick, because in the end, it's extinction, regardless of which one you pick. What you really need is both. What you really need is not an adversarial attitude between two sides, between the yin and the yang, but a sense of partnership, a belief that we need each other and we need a contrast of different ideas, all gathered under one big tent of acceptance, tolerance, and willingness to listen. That should be the message that we're trying to project in the world however we can. Whether we can affect that or not remains to be seen and is unknown. But that should be the attitude and the posture that we take. We should be supportive of everyone, but never endorsing any one voice fully, entirely at the expense of others. And ultimately, in our lives, as we talk about politics and all of these abstract things, these are things to contemplate when it's time to go down to the voting booth, to be sure. But at least in America, that's only about every 2 years or so that we wind up needing to cast some ballots. The rest of the time, we really just need to live our lives. We need to be respectful of our neighbors. We need to think about trying to make other people feel comfortable instead of trying to make ourselves come out on top. We should start trying to listen so that we can understand instead of listening so that we can respond. And in life, we're often so obsessed with getting our message across that when we're in the presence of other people, we don't even really care what they have to say. We just listen, waiting until they stop talking so that we can say what we've wanted to say all along. And that's not really the true spirit of justice. That isn't good faith. We have to approach every conversation with an open mind to acknowledge that maybe, even if we hold differing points of view, we're the ones in the wrong. We need to be willing to consider that maybe we should pivot our position. And we also need to be comfortable to say the positions that we've always held aren't necessarily going to be the right ones to hold in the future. That's why, regardless of what my political opinions tend to be, I always will hold to the notion that the fact that I voted one way in the last election doesn't mean I won't vote differently in the next one. As someone who's voted for both Democrats and Republicans, I find it's not really about making one win. It's about making sure that both have an equal voice and both have the opportunity to be heard. As always, kindness, patience, grace, temperance, wisdom, those are things which we can apply every day, regardless of what our political views are. And the golden rule doesn't really have a party, does it? So be gracious. Like they would say, be British. Maybe not in the nationalistic sense, but in the sense that whether life goes as we wish for it to or not, we should always be gracious and kind to our fellow citizens. We should always have dignity and grace in our methods and in our dealings with others. And that's something we can put into practice all the time, no matter where we find ourselves. In an increasingly polarized and chaotic world, it's now more important than ever that we use the tools we have to bring each other closer together instead of, as we are tempted to do, making divisions deeper. As always, good luck on your adventure next time. Thanks so much for watching.